Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Riverside High School, her worn sneakers hitting the cracked pavement with a soft thud. The September morning was crisp, and she pulled her oversized jacket tighter around her small frame. To everyone watching, she looked like just another new student, quiet, unremarkable, maybe even fragile. But appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. What the students of Riverside High didn't know was that Sarah had just returned from 3 years at the most elite military academy in the country. What they couldn't see beneath her deliberately casual clothes were the scars from advanced combat training. What they couldn't hear in her soft voice was the authority that had commanded respect from seasoned officers twice her age. And what they definitely didn't know was that at 17 years old, Sarah Martinez held the unprecedented rank of Cadet Admiral, the youngest person in military history to achieve such a position. She had come to Riverside High for one reason: to experience normal teenage life before her military career consumed everything. Her father, a decorated general, had insisted she try civilian school for her final year. "You need to know what you're protecting," he had said. But as Sarah walked through the school gates, watching groups of students eye her with the calculating cruelty that teenagers were famous for, she wondered if this mission would prove more dangerous than anything the military had thrown at her. The queen bee of Riverside High, Jessica Chun, stood surrounded by her loyal followers near the main entrance. Her perfectly styled hair caught the morning sunlight, and her designer clothes screamed wealth and privilege. She had ruled this school with an iron fist for 3 years, and she wasn't about to let some nobody-knew girl disrupt her kingdom. As Sarah passed by, trying to blend into the background, Jessica's cold laugh cut through the morning chatter. "Look what the bus dragged in," Jessica said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Goodwill called. They want their clothes back." Sarah paused for just a moment, her military training automatically assessing the threat level. In combat situations, she would have already calculated 17 different ways to neutralize the enemy. But this wasn't combat, this was high school. And for the first time in years, Admiral Sarah Martinez had to remember how to be just Sarah. She kept walking, her footsteps steady and measured. Behind her, Jessica's laughter grew louder, more vicious. The pack was already circling. What Jessica didn't realize was that she had just declared war on someone who had been trained by the best military minds in the world. Someone who had faced down enemy combatants and emerged victorious. Someone who understood strategy, psychological warfare, and the art of patience better than any teenager had a right to. This was going to be interesting. Sarah Martinez adjusted her backpack straps as she walked through the crowded hallways of Riverside High School. The walls were painted an institutional beige that reminded her of the barracks, but instead of the disciplined silence she was used to, chaos reigned everywhere. Students shouted across corridors, locker doors slammed like gunshots, and the general disorder made her military-trained mind twitch with the need to organize everything. She had studied the school layout the night before, memorizing every exit, every stairwell, every potential choke point. Old habits died hard, and her father had always taught her that preparation was the difference between victory and defeat. The main office was located on the first floor, east wing, third door on the right. Her first class, advanced chemistry, was on the second floor, west wing. She had already calculated the most efficient route and identified 3 alternate paths in case of emergency. What she hadn't calculated was the social minefield she was about to walk into. As Sarah approached her locker, number 247, combination 18-35-42, she noticed the whispers starting. Groups of students looked her way, some with curiosity, others with the kind of predatory interest that made her hand instinctively move toward where a combat knife would normally be strapped to her thigh. But there was no knife there. Just the awkward reality of being a 17-year-old girl trying to fit into a world she had left behind 3 years ago. Well, a voice said behind her. "Look what we have here." Sarah turned slowly, her movements controlled and precise. Standing before her was Jessica Chun, flanked by 4 other girls who formed a perfect intimidation formation. In military terms, it was textbook psychological warfare: establish dominance, control the narrative, and isolate the target. Jessica was everything Sarah wasn't trying to be. Her long black hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, her makeup was flawlessly applied, and her outfit probably cost more than most people made in a month. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged, never been defeated, never had to earn respect through blood, sweat, and tears. "I'm Jessica," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I basically run things around here." "And you are?" "Sarah," came the simple reply. Sarah had learned long ago that giving minimal information was always the safest strategy when dealing with potential hostiles. "Sarah," Jessica repeated, testing the name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "And where exactly did you transfer from, Sarah? Because looking at those clothes, I'm guessing it wasn't anywhere important." Sarah glanced down at her outfit. She was wearing dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, and a military surplus jacket that had seen better days. Compared to Jessica's designer ensemble, she probably did look like she had shopped at a thrift store. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had access to a military clothing allowance that could have bought her any outfit she wanted, but she had deliberately chosen to blend in. "Just moved here," Sarah said, turning back to her locker. She dialed the combination with practiced efficiency, each number falling into place with a satisfying click. "Just moved here," Jessica mimicked in a mocking tone. "How mysterious. Girls, I think our new friend here might be too good to talk to us properly." The four girls flanking Jessica laughed on cue. Sarah recognized the behavior, pack dynamics, established hierarchy through intimidation, and group reinforcement. She had seen similar tactics used in prisoner interrogation scenarios, though those at least served a military purpose. "Maybe she's shy," said one of Jessica's followers, a blonde girl with too much lip gloss. "Or maybe she just doesn't know how things work around here." Sarah pulled her chemistry textbook from her locker, noting the weight and balance automatically. In a combat situation, it would make an excellent improvised weapon. She pushed the thought away. This wasn't combat, no matter how much it felt like entering hostile territory. "Things were pretty simply here," Jessica continued, stepping closer. "There's a natural order. People like me at the top, and people like you." She gestured dismissively at Sarah's appearance. "Well, you'll figure out where you belong soon enough." Sarah closed her locker door and turned to face Jessica directly. For just a moment, her military bearings showed through shoulders back, chin up, eyes focused and alert. Jessica actually took a half step backward before catching herself. "Thanks for the orientation," Sarah said evenly. "I'm sure I'll figure things out." As she walked away, Sarah heard Jessica's voice rise behind her. "Did she just dismiss me? Did that nobody just walk away from me?" Sarah continued down the hallway, her pace steady and unhurried. Behind her, she could hear Jessica's group chattering excitedly, their voices carrying that particular pitch that meant trouble was brewing. She had made an enemy, probably several enemies, on her first day. In military terms, this was what they called a tactical disadvantage. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived 3 years of advanced military training by backing down from a fight. She had faced down armed insurgents, survived wilderness training exercises that had broken grown men, and earned the respect of officers who had initially dismissed her as too young, too small, too female for serious consideration. A pack of spoiled teenagers was going to be child's play. Her first class, advanced chemistry, was taught by Mr. Patterson, a tired-looking man in his 50s who barely looked up when she entered. The classroom was set up with lab tables for two, and most were already occupied by established partnerships. Sarah scanned the room quickly, identifying potential allies and threats with the automatic efficiency that had been drilled into her during tactical assessment training. "You must be our new student," Mr. Patterson said without enthusiasm. "Find an empty seat. We're starting our unit on explosive compounds today." Sarah almost smiled at the irony. She probably knew more about explosive compounds than Mr. Patterson did, having spent an entire semester learning how to make, defuse, and deploy various types of ordnance. But she kept her expression neutral and found an empty seat next to a quiet boy with thick glasses and nervous energy. "I'm Marcus," he whispered as she sat down. "Fair warning, Jessica Chun is in this class, and she's already looking at you like you kicked her dog." Sarah glanced over to where Jessica sat at a premium lab table near the front of the room. Sure enough, Jessica was staring at her with undisguised hostility. When their eyes met, Jessica's lips curved into a smile that held absolutely no warmth. "Thanks for the heads up," Sarah replied quietly. "Don't mention it. Literally, if Jessica finds out I warned you about her, she'll make my life even more miserable than it already is." As Mr. Patterson began explaining the properties of various chemical reactions, Sarah found her mind wandering to tactical considerations. Jessica Chun was clearly the alpha predator in this ecosystem. She had followers, resources, and the kind of casual cruelty that came from a lifetime of getting everything she wanted. In military terms, she was a well-entrenched enemy with superior numbers and local knowledge. But every enemy had weaknesses. Every fortress had vulnerable points. And Sarah had been trained by the best military strategists in the world to find those weaknesses and exploit them. The class passed without incident, but Sarah could feel eyes on her constantly. Jessica's followers were watching her every move, cataloging every detail for later analysis. It was like being under surveillance by amateur intelligence operatives who thought they were subtle. As students began packing up their materials, Mr. Patterson called out, "Don't forget, your lab reports are due next Friday. I expect detailed analysis and proper citations." Sarah was organizing her notes when she felt someone bump into her from behind, hard enough to knock her textbook to the floor. She turned to see Jessica standing there with an expression of mock concern. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," Jessica said loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "I'm so clumsy sometimes. Here, let me help you pick that up." But instead of helping, Jessica stepped on the textbook, grinding her designer heel into the cover. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. Sarah looked down at her damaged textbook, then back up at Jessica. For a moment, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Sarah's eyes went completely cold, and something in her expression made Jessica's confident smile falter slightly. Then Sarah bent down, picked up her textbook, and dusted it off calmly. "No problem," she said quietly. "Accidents happen." But as she walked out of the classroom, Sarah was already formulating a strategy. Jessica wanted to play games? Sarah had been trained in psychological warfare by people who made Jessica look like an amateur. This was going to be educational for everyone involved. The rest of the morning passed in similar fashion. In every class, Sarah could feel the weight of hostile attention. Jessica's network was extensive. She had eyes and ears everywhere, and they were all focused on the new girl who had dared to not show proper respect. During lunch, Sarah found herself sitting alone at a table in the far corner of the cafeteria. She had chosen the position strategically, back to the wall, clear view of all entrances, easy access to exits. The food was barely edible compared to military rations, which was saying something. She was picking at what the cafeteria optimistically called chicken when Marcus from chemistry class approached her table hesitantly. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, looking around nervously. "Sure," Sarah replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Marcus sat down quickly, hunching his shoulders like he was trying to make himself invisible. "You really shouldn't have done that," he said without preamble. "Done what?" "Challenge Jessica like that. The textbook thing. I saw the look you gave her. She's not going to forget that." Sarah took a bite of her questionable chicken. "What's the worst she can do? Give me a wedgie." "You don't understand," Marcus said urgently. "Jessica doesn't just run the school. Her father owns half the businesses in town. Her mother is on the school board. She can make your life absolutely miserable, and she will." "Has she made your life miserable?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Every day for 3 years. But I keep my head down, don't make waves, and mostly she ignores me. You, on the other hand, have painted a target on your back." Sarah studied Marcus carefully. He was obviously intelligent. She had heard his questions in chemistry class and recognized a sharp analytical mind. But he was also clearly beaten down, worn out by years of psychological warfare from Jessica and her followers. "What would you do?" she asked. "If you could do anything about Jessica, what would it be?" Marcus looked around the cafeteria nervously, making sure no one was listening. "Honestly, I'd love to see someone finally put her in her place. But it's never going to happen. She's untouchable." "Everyone's touchable," Sarah said quietly. "You just have to find a right pressure point." Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted across the cafeteria. Sarah looked up to see Jessica and her entire crew approaching their table, moving with the predatory confidence of sharks who had smelled blood in the water. Well, Jessica said as she reached their table. "Look who found a school loser to eat lunch with. Birds of a feather, I guess." Sarah looked up at Jessica calmly, her expression giving nothing away. "Did you need something?" "Oh, I think we need to have a little chat about respect," Jessica said, her voice loud enough to carry to nearby tables. Students were starting to turn and watch, sensing drama. "See, Marcus here knows how things work. He knows to show proper respect to his betters. But you seem confused about your place in the food chain." Sarah stood up slowly, her movements fluid and controlled. She was several inches shorter than Jessica, but something in her bearing made the height difference seem irrelevant. "And what place is that?" Sarah asked quietly. Jessica's smile widened. "At the bottom, with the rest of the trash." The cafeteria had gone quiet now, everyone watching the confrontation. Sarah could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on them, waiting to see how the new girl would handle being publicly humiliated by the school's queen bee. Sarah looked around the cafeteria, taking in all the watching faces, then back at Jessica. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone could hear it clearly. "You know what's interesting about trash?" Sarah said. "Sometimes you don't realize how much it stinks until someone comes along to take it out." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous shade of purple. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to her like that in public. "You," Jessica snarled, jabbing a finger at Sarah's chest, "just made the biggest mistake of your pathetic life." Sarah looked down at the finger poking her chest, then back up at Jessica. For just a moment, her military training took over completely. She could have broken that finger in 3 places before Jessica even realized what was happening. She could have had Jessica flat on her back and immobilized in under 2 seconds. Instead, she simply stepped back, causing Jessica's finger to fall harmlessly to her side. "I guess we'll see," Sarah said calmly. Then, she picked up her lunch tray and walked away, leaving Jessica standing there in front of the entire cafeteria, publicly defied for the first time in her high school career. As Sarah left the cafeteria, she could hear the buzz of excited conversation exploding behind her. News of the confrontation would be all over school within the hour. Jessica Chun had been challenged, and, worse, she had let the challenger walk away. Sarah dumped her tray and headed for her next class, already mentally preparing for the war that Jessica was undoubtedly planning. She had 3 years of military strategic training to draw on. Jessica had 3 years of high school social manipulation. It was going to be an interesting battle. The first strike came during 3rd period. Sarah was in world history, trying to focus on Mr. Henderson's lecture about military strategies during World War II. The irony of learning about tactics from a teacher who had obviously never seen real combat wasn't lost on her, but she kept her opinions to herself and took detailed notes. She was writing down something about the importance of supply lines when her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. Then another. Within 30 seconds, her phone was vibrating constantly with incoming messages. Mr. Henderson stopped mid-sentence and fixed her with a stern look. "Miss Martinez, I believe our discussion of the Battle of Normandy is more important than whatever's happening on your phone." "Sorry," Sarah said, quickly putting her phone on silent. But the damage was done. Everyone in the class was looking at her, and she could see several students smirking like they were in on some kind of joke. When class ended, Sarah finally checked her phone. She had received over 40 text messages, all for numbers she didn't recognize. But the messages themselves made her stomach sink. "Heard you're easy. Want to hang out? How much do you charge? My friend says you'll do anything for $20. Looking for a good time tonight? Hit me up." The messages kept coming, each one more explicit and disgusting than the last. Someone had obviously given out her phone number along with some very specific lies about what kind of person she was. Sarah deleted the messages methodically, her jaw clenched with controlled anger. This was a classic psychological warfare tactic: attack the target's reputation, isolate them socially, and force them to spend energy defending themselves instead of mounting their own offensive. In military terms, it was effective. In high school terms, it was devastating. By lunchtime, the whispers had started. Sarah could hear fragments of conversation as she walked through the halls. "I heard she was expelled from her last school for. My cousin's friend says she used to. Can you believe someone like that just walks around like she's normal?" The rumors were spreading like wildfire, each repetition making them more salacious and damaging. By the time Sarah reached her locker, she could feel the weight of hostile stares from every direction. Students who had simply ignored her that morning were now looking at her with disgust and curiosity. Marcus was waiting by her locker, his face pale with worry. "Sarah, I don't know what Jessica did, but everyone's saying..." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I know what they're saying," Sarah replied calmly, spinning her combination lock with steady fingers. "It's not true. I know that," Marcus said quickly. "But it doesn't matter. Once Jessica plants a story like this, it takes on a life of its own. By tomorrow, half the school will believe it, and by next week, everyone will treat it like established fact. Sarah pulled her afternoon textbooks from her locker, considering her options. In a military situation, when facing an enemy with superior numbers and local support, there were several possible strategies. You could retreat and regroup. You could dig in and defend your position. Or you could go on the offensive and strike at the enemy's weak points before they could consolidate their advantage. Has she done this before? Sarah asked. To other people? All the time. There was this girl freshman year, Emma Rodriguez. She accidentally spilled juice on Jessica's designer bag. By the end of the week, there were rumors that Emma was stealing from other students' lockers. Emma's parents ended up transferring her to private school. What about teachers? Administration? Don't they do anything? Marcus laughed bitterly. Jessica's too smart to leave evidence. It's always rumors, whispers, social media posts that can't be traced back to her directly. And, like I told you, her mother is on the school board. Complaining about Jessica is career suicide for any teacher. Sarah closed her locker and leaned against it, thinking Jessica had made the first move, and it was a good one. She had attacked Sarah's reputation in a way that would be almost impossible to defend against directly. Denying the rumors would just make people think about them more. Ignoring them would let them spread unchecked. But Jessica had also made a mistake. She had declared total war on someone she knew nothing about. And, in Sarah's experience, enemies who underestimated their opponents usually learn to regret it. Marcus, Sarah said quietly, what's Jessica's weakness? What do you mean? Everyone has something they're afraid of losing. Something that matters more to them than anything else. What is it for Jessica? Marcus looked around nervously. I don't know if I should. I'm not asking you to help me hurt her, Sarah said. I'm asking you to help me understand her. There's a difference. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. Her image. Her reputation. Being Queen Bee isn't just what she does, it's who she is. She's built her entire identity around being the most popular, most feared, most powerful person in school. If that ever cracked, she'd do anything to protect it. Exactly. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Jessica's strength was also her weakness. Her need to maintain her image meant she had to respond to any challenge, no matter how small. She couldn't let anything slide, couldn't show any weakness, couldn't risk appearing vulnerable. That was exploitable. Thanks, Sarah said. I owe you one. Sarah, please don't do anything crazy. Jessica isn't just mean, she's connected. She can make your life hell in ways you haven't even imagined yet. But Sarah was already walking away, her mind working through the tactical situation with the cold precision that had earned her an Admiral's rank at 17. Jessica wanted to play psychological warfare? Fine. But she was about to learn the difference between amateur hour and professional-grade combat tactics. The next strike came during gym class. Sarah had changed into the required uniform, a plain gray t-shirt and blue shorts that made everyone look equally unflattering. She was lacing up her sneakers when she noticed the other girls in the locker room, giving her strange looks and whispering among themselves. Is it true what they're saying? Asked a girl named Brittany, who Sarah recognized as one of Jessica's outer circle followers. I don't know what they're saying, Sarah replied evenly. Come on, said another girl. Everyone knows about your little side business. Jessica told us all about what you were doing at your old school. Sarah stood up slowly, her patience finally wearing thin. And what exactly did Jessica tell you? The girls exchanged glances, suddenly, less confident when faced with direct confrontation. You know, Brittany said weakly, the things you did. For money. Be specific, Sarah said, her voice taking on an edge that made several girls take a step backward. What exactly am I supposed to have done? We heard. Brittany stammered, clearly realizing she was in over her head. You heard rumors, Sarah said coldly, spread by someone who doesn't know the first thing about me. And you believe them without question because thinking for yourself is apparently too difficult. The locker room had gone completely quiet. Sarah looked around at all the faces staring at her, some hostile, some curious, some just uncomfortable with the tension. Here's the thing about rumors, Sarah continued, her voice carrying clearly in the silence. They say a lot more about the people spreading them than they do about their targets. What kind of person invents disgusting lies about someone they've never even talked to? She let the question hang in the air for a moment. And what kind of person believes those lies without asking for proof? With that, she walked out of the locker room, leaving behind a group of very uncomfortable teenage girls. Gym class was dodgeball, which struck Sarah as almost comically appropriate given the circumstances. She found herself on the opposite team from Jessica, which was clearly no coincidence. Jessica had undoubtedly arranged the teams to put Sarah at a disadvantage. What Jessica didn't know was that dodgeball was essentially combat training with rubber balls instead of live ammunition. Sarah had spent months in advanced tactical training courses that involved dodging actual projectiles while maintaining situational awareness and striking back at multiple targets. The game started with the usual chaos, balls flying everywhere, students diving and ducking, the gymnasium echoing with shouts, and the sharp smack of rubber against skin. Sarah moved with fluid precision, avoiding incoming throws while carefully studying the opposing team's patterns and weaknesses. Jessica, naturally, had positioned herself as the team captain and was directing her followers like a general commanding troops. She was good at it too, coordinating attacks, calling out targets, maintaining team discipline. But she had made one crucial error. She was so focused on orchestrating Sarah's humiliation that she forgot to pay attention to Sarah herself. Sarah moved like a ghost across the gymnasium floor, dodging throws that should have hit her, appearing where enemies didn't expect her. One by one, Jessica's team members were eliminated, picked off with throws so precise and powerful that they barely had time to react. Within 10 minutes, it was down to just Jessica and two of her closest followers against Sarah and one other girl from her team. "Take her out," Jessica commanded, pointing at Sarah. "All 3 balls right now." The 2 girls grabbed the remaining balls and hurled them at Sarah with all their strength. Sarah dropped into a crouch, letting the first ball sail over her head, spun to avoid the second, and caught the third one cleanly. The girl who had thrown the third ball was automatically out, leaving Jessica facing Sarah in what amounted to a one-on-one duel in front of the entire gym class. The gymnasium had gone quiet except for the squeak of sneakers on polished wood. Everyone was watching, sensing that this was about more than just a game of dodgeball. Jessica held the ball like a weapon, her face flushed with anger and exertion. "You think you're so special," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see how special you feel with a ball in your face." She threw with all her strength, aiming directly for Sarah's head. It was a vicious throw, meant to hurt rather than just eliminate. Sarah sidestepped the ball so smoothly it looked almost choreographed. The ball smacked into the wall, behind her with a sound like a gunshot. Then Sarah wound up and threw her own ball. It wasn't the hardest throw she was capable of. Sarah could have put enough force behind it to actually injure Jessica. But that would have been excessive force, and Sarah had been trained to use only the minimum necessary to achieve the objective. The ball caught Jessica square in the chest, hard enough to knock her backward, but not hard enough to cause real damage. Jessica hit the gymnasium floor with a grunt of surprise and pain, the wind knocked out of her lungs. The game was over. Sarah's team had won. But more importantly, Jessica Chun had been publicly defeated for the second time in one day. As Jessica struggled to catch her breath, Sarah walked over and offered her a hand up. It was a gesture that looked sportsmanlike to the watching gym teacher, but the message was clear to everyone who understood subtext. Sarah was demonstrating that she could have done much worse. Jessica stared at the offered hand for a moment, her face cycling through rage, humiliation, and something that might have been fear. Then she slapped the hand away and got to her feet under her own power. "Lucky shot," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sure," Sarah agreed mildly. "Luck." But everyone in the gymnasium had seen what really happened. Jessica Chun, the undisputed queen of Riverside High, had been outmaneuvered and outplayed by the new girl. And Jessica knew it. As students filed out of the gym, Sarah could hear the buzz of excited conversation. The story would be all over school within the hour. And this time it wouldn't be rumors designed to hurt her reputation. This time, it would be the truth about what happened when Jessica Chun picked a fight with the wrong person. In the locker room, Sarah changed back into her regular clothes quietly. Several girls tried to approach her, some to congratulate her, others just to get close to someone who had achieved the impossible. But Sarah wasn't interested in becoming a celebrity. She had accomplished her immediate tactical objective, which was to demonstrate that Jessica could be beaten. Now she needed to prepare for Jessica's inevitable counterattack, because Jessica Chun was about to learn that humiliation was a powerful motivator, and desperate enemies were often the most dangerous. As Sarah headed to her next class, she found Marcus waiting for her in the hallway, his eyes wide with amazement. Did you really just destroy Jessica's entire team single-handedly? He asked. It's just dodgeball, Sarah replied. No, it's not. It's the first time anyone has ever made Jessica look weak in public. Do you realize what you've done? Sarah paused, considering the question. In military terms, she had achieved a significant tactical victory while maintaining the moral high ground. She had demonstrated superior capability without resorting to excessive force. She had sent a clear message to both enemies and potential allies about what she was capable of. I played a game and won, she said finally. You did a lot more than that, Marcus said, shaking his head in wonder. You just changed the entire balance of power in this school. As they walked to their next class together, Sarah reflected on the day's events. Jessica had fired the first shot in what was clearly going to be an escalating conflict. But she had also revealed crucial intelligence about her own capabilities and methods. Jessica was used to fighting enemies who would crumble under social pressure. She relied on rumors, intimidation, and the power of her reputation to win battles before they really started. But Sarah Martinez wasn't like Jessica's previous enemies. She had been trained to operate in hostile territory, to maintain mission focus under extreme pressure, and to turn enemy strengths against them. Jessica wanted a war? She was about to get one. But it wasn't going to go the way she expected. Sarah arrived at school the next morning to find her locker vandalized. Someone had spray-painted the word slut across the metal door in bright red letters, along with several other choice words that would have made a drill sergeant blush. Students walking by slowed down to stare, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable. A few took pictures with their phones. Sarah stood in front of her locker for a moment, studying the damage with the clinical detachment she had been trained to use when assessing enemy action. This was escalation. Jessica was moving from subtle psychological warfare to overt acts of vandalism that suggested either desperation or confidence that she could get away with more direct attacks. Oh my God, Sarah, I'm so sorry, came a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Emma Rodriguez approaching, her face filled with genuine concern. Sarah recognized her as the girl Marcus had mentioned, the one who had been forced to transfer schools after crossing Jessica. You came back, Sarah observed. My parents couldn't afford private school tuition anymore, Emma explained, her voice bitter. So here I am, back in hell. I heard about what happened yesterday in gym class. Jessica must be furious. This is her response, Sarah said, gesturing at the graffiti. It's not going to stop here, Emma warned. Jessica doesn't just defeat her enemies. She destroys them completely. She'll keep escalating until you break or leave. Sarah pulled out her phone and took several clear photos of the vandalized locker from different angles. Did you see who did this? No, but it doesn't matter. Jessica's too smart to do it herself. She'll have one of her followers do the dirty work, someone who won't be missed if they get caught. As if summoned by their conversation, Jessica appeared around the corner, flanked by her usual entourage. She walked past Sarah's locker without seeming to notice the graffiti, but the slight smirk on her face made it clear she was well aware of what had happened. Good morning, Sarah, Jessica said sweetly. How are you enjoying your Riverside High experience so far? Educational, Sarah replied evenly. I'm sure it is. By the way, I heard the funniest rumor yesterday. Apparently someone thinks they're tough because they got lucky in a children's game. Isn't that adorable? Sarah studied Jessica's face carefully. The other girl was playing it cool, but there were telltale signs of stress, slightly dilated pupils, tension around the eyes, a forced quality to her smile. The public defeat in gym class had rattled her more than she wanted to admit. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity, Sarah said quietly. How philosophical. Well, I hope your luck holds out. This school can be such a dangerous place for people who don't know their place. After Jessica and her followers moved on, Sarah stood looking at her vandalized locker for another moment. Then, she walked directly to the main office. Mrs. Henderson, the school's secretary, looked up from her computer with a tired expression. Can I help you? Someone vandalized my locker, Sarah said, showing her the photos on her phone. I'd like to file a report. Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted to concern as she looked at the images. Oh my, this is completely unacceptable. I'll get Principal Martinez right away. Principal Martinez, no relation, despite the shared surname, was a thin man in his 50s who looked like he had been worn down by years of dealing with teenage drama. He listened to Sarah's report with professional sympathy, but weary eyes. I'm very sorry this happened, he said. We have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior. I'll have maintenance clean it up immediately, and we'll review security footage to try to identify who's responsible. Thank you, Sarah said. I'd also like to request that copies of the security footage be made available to local police, since vandalism is a criminal offense. Principal Martinez looked surprised. Most students who came to his office wanted problems handled quietly within the school system. They didn't usually invoke criminal law. That's certainly you're right, he said carefully. Are you sure you want to escalate things that far? Sometimes these incidents can be resolved more amicably through school discipline. Sarah looked at him steadily. Sir, someone committed a crime against me because they didn't like how I played dodgeball. I think involving proper authorities sends an important message about what kind of behavior is acceptable. Of course. I'll have the footage copied for you. As Sarah left the office, she reflected on what she had accomplished. She had created an official paper trail, established herself as someone who wouldn't be intimidated into silence, and put Jessica on notice that her actions would have real consequences. In military terms, she had just escalated the rules of engagement. During lunch, Sarah found herself sitting with Marcus and Emma at what was apparently the unofficial table for social outcasts. Several other students had joined them, kids who had been on the receiving end of Jessica's cruelty over the years. I can't believe you actually went to the principal, said a quiet boy named David. No one ever reports Jessica. Why not? Sarah asked. Because it never works, Emma replied. She's too smart to leave direct evidence, and her mother has too much influence with the school board. Anyone who tries to fight back officially just ends up looking like a troublemaker. Plus, she retaliates, added Marcus. Hard. You think the locker thing was bad? Wait until she really gets creative. Sarah was about to respond when she noticed a commotion across the cafeteria. Jessica was standing at the center of her usual table, but instead of the confident queen bee posture she normally projected, she looked agitated. She was gesturing angrily while talking on her phone, her voice loud enough to carry despite the cafeteria noise. What do you mean there's video evidence? Jessica was saying. That's impossible. We made sure. What? No, I had nothing to do with any vandalism. Why would I waste my time on something so juvenile? Sarah felt a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Apparently, the security footage had been more revealing than Jessica expected. She's panicking, Emma observed, following Sarah's gaze. I've never seen her look scared before. She should be scared, Marcus said quietly. If there's actual evidence tying her to the locker thing, her mother won't be able to protect her from criminal charges. As they watched, Jessica hung up her phone and immediately began talking urgently to her followers. Even from across the cafeteria, they could see the tension in her body language. Whatever she was saying, her lieutenants were listening with rapt attention. She's planning something, David said nervously. When Jessica gets backed into a corner, she gets vicious. Sarah nodded, already thinking through possible scenarios. Jessica's options were limited. She could either back down and lose face, or escalate further and risk serious consequences. Given what Sarah had observed about her personality, escalation was almost inevitable. That afternoon, Sarah was walking to her car after school when she noticed she was being followed. 3 boys she didn't recognize were trailing about 20 feet behind her, trying to look casual but doing a poor job of it. Sarah had been trained in counter-surveillance techniques, and these amateurs wouldn't have fooled a civilian, much less someone with her background. She could identify at least 4 opportunities to lose them between the school and the parking lot, or, if necessary, 3 different ways to neutralize the threat if they turned violent. But she was curious about what they were planning, so she let them follow her. As she reached her car, a modest Honda Civic that had been chosen specifically to avoid drawing attention, the 3 boys spread out in what they probably thought was a tactical formation. Sarah almost laughed at their amateur hour approach to intimidation. Hey, called out the largest of the 3, a football player type with more muscle than brains. You're the new girl, right? Sarah. Sarah turned to face them, keeping her body language relaxed, but maintaining peripheral awareness of possible escape routes and improvised weapons. That's right. We heard you've been causing problems for Jessica, said another boy. This one tall and skinny with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was more afraid of Jessica than he was of Sarah. I haven't caused problems for anyone, Sarah replied calmly. I've just been going to school. Well, here's the thing, the big one said, taking a step closer. Jessica is like royalty around here, and when someone disrespects royalty, sometimes they need to learn a lesson about respect. Sarah looked at the three boys with something approaching pity. They were clearly Jessica's pawns, probably promised some reward for intimidating the new girl into submission. They had no idea what they were dealing with. "And you three are going to teach me this lesson?" Sarah asked. "If that's what it takes," the big one replied, puffing out his chest. Sarah sighed. This was unfortunate. She had hoped to avoid physical confrontation, but Jessica had obviously decided to escalate beyond psychological warfare. "Before we go any further," Sarah said quietly, "I want you to think very carefully about what you're doing. You're threatening a fellow student in a school parking lot, probably on camera, at the behest of someone who won't protect you if you get caught." The boys exchanged glances, some of their confidence wavering. "Jessica said you try to talk your way out of it," the skinny one said. "She said you're all talk. Did she also tell you that assaulting another student is a felony? That you could be arrested, expelled, and have your futures permanently damaged over a high school social dispute?" "You're not going to tell anyone," the big one said, but he sounded less certain than before. "Because if you do, it'll just get worse for you." Sarah nodded slowly. "So your plan is to assault me, then threaten me into silence. Have you considered what happens if your plan doesn't work?" "It'll work," the big one said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Okay," Sarah said softly. "But remember, you had a chance to walk away." What happened next lasted approximately 15 seconds. The big one swung first, a wild haymaker that telegraphed itself from across the parking lot. Sarah sidestepped easily, grabbed his extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him face first into the side of her car. He went down hard and stayed down. The skinny one tried to grab her from behind, which was a mistake. Sarah drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus, doubling him over, then swept his legs out from under him. He hit the asphalt, gasping for breath. The third boy, showing more wisdom than his companions, turned to run. Sarah let him go. She had made her point. The entire encounter had been witnessed by at least a dozen students leaving school, all of whom had pulled out their phones to record what they thought was going to be three boys beating up the new girl. Instead, they had footage of Sarah Martinez single-handedly defeating three attackers without breaking a sweat. As Sarah got in her car and drove away, leaving the two boys groaning on the asphalt, she reflected on the day's developments. Jessica had escalated to physical intimidation and failed spectacularly. The video footage of the encounter would be all over social media within hours, completely undermining Jessica's narrative that Sarah was weak and vulnerable. More importantly, Jessica had revealed something crucial about herself. She was willing to use other people to do her dirty work, even if it meant putting them in legal jeopardy. That was exploitable. That evening, Sarah sat in her room, planning her next moves with the methodical precision that had earned her an Admiral's rank. She had notebooks full of intelligence about Jessica's network, her methods, her weaknesses, and her resources. Jessica Chun had spent 3 years building a kingdom based on fear and manipulation. But kingdoms built on such foundations were inherently unstable. They required constant maintenance, constant shows of strength, constant victories to maintain legitimacy. And Jessica had just suffered 2 very public defeats in as many days. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Holy crap. The video is everywhere. You're like a legend already." Another text, this one from Emma. "Jessica is freaking out. She's been calling people all evening trying to do damage control." A third text from David. "I heard she's planning something big. Be careful." Sarah turned off her phone and returned to her planning. Jessica was indeed planning something big. That much was obvious. A cornered enemy with resources and connections was always dangerous. But Sarah had been trained to fight much more dangerous enemies than a spoiled teenager with anger management issues. The war was just getting started. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school to find herself famous. The video of her single-handedly defeating 3 attackers had gone viral overnight, not just within Riverside High, but across multiple social media platforms. Students she had never met nodded respectfully as she walked through the halls. Underclassmen stared at her with something approaching awe. But, more importantly, she could see the fear in the eyes of Jessica's followers. The carefully constructed image of Jessica as untouchable had been shattered in 15 seconds of parking lot combat. Sarah was getting books from her now-clean locker when Principal Martinez approached her. "Miss Martinez," he said quietly, "I need to see you in my office." Sarah followed him through the halls, noting how conversations stopped as they passed. Everyone was watching, waiting to see if the new girl who had become an overnight legend was about to be expelled for fighting. In his office, Principal Martinez closed the door and gestured for Sarah to sit. "I've reviewed the security footage from yesterday's incident in the parking lot," he said without preamble. "All of it." Sarah waited silently. In military debriefings, the first rule was to let the other person talk. Information was power, and she needed to understand exactly what he knew before responding. "The footage clearly shows 3 male students approaching you in what appears to be a coordinated manner," Principal Martinez continued. "It shows them surrounding you and engaging in what can only be described as threatening behavior. And it shows you defending yourself with what I can only call remarkable skill." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "Where exactly did you learn to fight like that? The footage makes it look almost professional." This was the question Sarah had been dreading. Her cover story was solid, but limited. She was supposed to be just another transfer student, not someone with military training. "My father was in the military," she said, which was true. "He insisted I learn self-defense." Principal Martinez nodded slowly. "Self-defense, right? Miss Martinez, I've been in education for 23 years. I've seen a lot of student fights. What you did yesterday wasn't self-defense, it was combat expertise." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally, she was calculating damage control options. If her true background was exposed, it could compromise not just her mission to experience normal teenage life, but potentially her father's military career as well. "Sir, I was attacked by 3 people. I protected myself using the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat." "Minimum force necessary," Principal Martinez repeated thoughtfully. "That's interesting phrasing. Very precise." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the office door. Mrs. Henderson poked her head in. "Principal Martinez? Mrs. Chun is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Sarah saw Principal Martinez's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Send her in." Mrs. Chun entered the office like she owned it, which in many ways she did. She was an older, more polished version of Jessica, perfectly dressed, perfectly made up, and radiating the kind of entitled authority that came from never being told no. "Principal Martinez," she said crisply. Then her gaze fell on Sarah. "And this must be the young lady who assaulted those poor boys yesterday." "Mrs. Chun," Principal Martinez replied carefully, "I was just reviewing the incident with Miss Martinez. The security footage clearly shows dash. I don't care what the footage shows," Mrs. Chun interrupted. "My daughter has informed me that this girl has been causing problems since her first day here, intimidating other students, making threats, and now she's escalated to actual violence." Sarah remained silent, but she was studying Mrs. Chun with the same analytical intensity she had learned to use on enemy commanders. This woman was used to getting her way through a combination of social pressure, political connections, and sheer force of personality. She was also clearly here to protect her daughter's reputation at all costs. "Mrs. Chun," Principal Martinez said, his voice taking on a slightly firmer tone, "I understand your concerns, but the footage is quite clear about who initiated the confrontation yesterday." "Footage can be misleading," Mrs. Chun replied smoothly. "What matters is that my daughter and her friends are afraid of this girl. Jessica came home in tears last night, terrified that she might be next." Sarah almost smiled at that. Jessica Chun, afraid? The same Jessica who had been systematically tormenting fellow students for 3 years? But she kept her expression neutral and continued listening. "Furthermore," Mrs. Chun continued, "I've done some research into Miss Martinez's background. Did you know she was expelled from her previous school for violent behavior?" That was interesting. Mrs. Chun had obviously done some digging, but since Sarah's cover story didn't include any previous schools, any research would have turned up nothing, which meant Mrs. Chun was fabricating evidence. "Mrs. Chun," Principal Martinez said slowly, "I'd be very interested to see documentation of that claim." "I'm sure it can be arranged," Mrs. Chun replied confidently. "The point is, this girl is clearly troubled and dangerous. For the safety of all our students, she needs to be removed from this school immediately." Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "Mrs. Chun, with respect, every word you just said is false. I wasn't expelled from any previous school because there was no previous school. I've never threatened your daughter or anyone else. And yesterday, I defended myself against an attack that your daughter orchestrated." Mrs. Chin's face reddened. "How dare you accuse my daughter dash? I'm not accusing," Sarah interrupted quietly. "I am stating facts. Your daughter has been waging a harassment campaign against me since my first day here. Yesterday, she escalated that campaign to physical intimidation using male students as proxies. The security footage will show those students following me, surrounding me, and threatening me before I defended myself. That's preposterous. It's also provable, Sarah continued. Principal Martinez, I assume you have security footage of the hallways and cafeteria as well as the parking lot. Principal Martinez nodded slowly. We do. Then you can track those 3 boys from the moment they were given their instructions to the moment they cornered me. You can see who they talked to, when, and where. You can verify that I never threatened anyone and that I never initiated any confrontation. Mrs. Chen looked less confident now. Video can be edited, manipulated. This is a public school, Mrs. Chen, not a Hollywood studio, Principal Martinez said dryly. Our security system creates time-stamped, authenticated recordings that would be very difficult to alter undetectably. Sarah could see the exact moment Mrs. Chen realized her strategy wasn't working. Her expression shifted from righteous anger to calculating assessment. She was used to intimidating school administrators into compliance, but Principal Martinez wasn't backing down. Perhaps, Mrs. Chen said slowly, we could discuss this more privately. I think Miss Martinez has a right to be present for any discussion about her future at this school, Principal Martinez replied. Sarah decided to take a calculated risk. Actually, I'd like Mrs. Chen to answer a question for me. Both adults looked at her with surprise. Mrs. Chen, you said your daughter came home in tears last night, afraid she might be next. Next for what, exactly? I've never threatened your daughter. I've barely spoken to her. So what specifically is she afraid I might do to her? It was a trap, and Mrs. Chen walked right into it. She's afraid you might attack her like you attacked those boys. So she acknowledges that I was attacked first? Mrs. Chen realized her mistake immediately. I didn't say . You just said she's afraid I might attack her like I attacked those boys. That implies she knows I was defending myself against an attack. How would she know that unless she was involved in planning it? The silence in the office was deafening. Mrs. Chen's face cycled through several shades of red as she realized she had just implicated her daughter in orchestrating the parking lot incident. Principal Martinez cleared his throat. Mrs. Chen, I think we need to have a separate conversation about your daughter's involvement in recent events. Jessica would never. This is all a misunderstanding, Mrs. Chen stammered, her usual confidence evaporating. I'm sure it is, Principal Martinez replied diplomatically. Miss Martinez, thank you for your time. You may return to class. Mrs. Chen, if you could stay a few more minutes? As Sarah left the office, she could hear Mrs. Chen's voice rising in panic behind the closed door. She had just watched one of the most powerful people in the school district realize that her daughter's actions might have serious legal consequences. The morning classes passed in a blur of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Word was already spreading that Sarah had been called to the principal's office, and speculation ranged from expulsion to commendation. But Sarah was focused on analyzing what she had learned from the confrontation with Mrs. Chen. Jessica's mother was her daughter's greatest asset and greatest weakness. She would do anything to protect Jessica's reputation and future prospects, but that protective instinct could be used against her. If Jessica's actions threatened real legal consequences, Mrs. Chen would have to choose between enabling her daughter and protecting the family's social standing. During lunch, Sarah found Marcus practically vibrating with excitement. Did you really make Mrs. Chen admit that Jessica set up the parking lot thing? He asked in a whisper. News travels fast, Sarah observed. Are you kidding? Mrs. Henderson heard the whole thing and told half the office staff. Jessica's been called out of class for a family conference. Everyone thinks she's about to get expelled. Emma slid into the seat across from them. My mom works in the district office, she said quietly. She heard Mrs. Chen on the phone this morning trying to get you transferred to another school. When that didn't work, she started calling in favors to have your records investigated. What kind of favors? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. The kind that involved private investigators and background checks, Emma replied. Mrs. Chen doesn't just want you gone. She wants to destroy any chance you have of rebuilding your life somewhere else. That was concerning. Sarah's cover story was solid, but it wasn't designed to withstand professional investigation. If Mrs. Chen hired actual private investigators, they might uncover inconsistencies that could lead back to her real background. There's something else, Emma continued. Jessica's been reaching out to students at other schools. She's trying to build some kind of coalition against you. What kind of coalition? I'm not sure exactly, but she's been in contact with students who have older siblings, friends who transferred here, anyone with connections outside Riverside. She's telling them that you're dangerous and unstable. Marcus looked worried. Sarah, maybe you should consider transferring voluntarily. Jessica's not going to stop, and now her mother's involved. They have resources we can't even imagine. Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering her options. In military terms, she was facing an escalating conflict with an enemy who had superior local resources and political connections. The logical move would be to withdraw and regroup. But Sarah Martinez hadn't achieved the rank of Admiral by backing down from fights. No, she said quietly. I'm not transferring. Sarah Marcus started. They started this war, Sarah continued, her voice taking on an edge that made both her friends look at her with surprise. They attacked me first, spread lies about me, vandalized my property, and sent people to physically intimidate me. I didn't come here looking for a fight, but I'm not running from one either. But what can you do? Emma asked. They have money, connections, influence. You're just one person. Sarah looked at her friends, these kids who had been beaten down by Jessica's cruelty for years, who had accepted their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy because fighting back seemed impossible. You want to know what I can do? Sarah asked quietly. She pulled out her phone and showed them a news article she had been monitoring. The headline read, Local high school student investigated for organized harassment campaign. How did this get out? Marcus asked, reading over her shoulder. I may have shared some information with a journalist friend of my father's, Sarah replied. Public records, security footage, documented evidence of systematic bullying. Turns out there's a lot of interest in stories about privileged students abusing their power. Emma's eyes widened. You went to the press? I gave them facts. They drew their own conclusions. As if summoned by their conversation, Jessica appeared at their table. But this wasn't the confident queen bee who had tormented students for 3 years. This was a scared teenager whose world was falling apart around her. You, Jessica said, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. You did this. Did what? Sarah asked calmly. The news story. My mother's friends are calling, asking about it. Do you have any idea what you've done? Sarah stood up slowly, and for the first time since she had arrived at Riverside High, she let her true nature show through completely. Her posture straightened into perfect military bearing. Her voice took on the crisp authority of someone accustomed to command, and her eyes went completely cold. I gave the truth a platform, she said quietly. You should be grateful I didn't give them everything. Everything? What are you talking about? The documented pattern of harassment stretching back 3 years. The evidence of your mother's attempts to intimidate school officials. The connections between your family and several incidents of students being forced to transfer schools. Should I continue? Jessica's face went white. You're bluffing. Try me. For a long moment, the two girls stared at each other across the cafeteria table. Around them, other students had stopped eating to watch the confrontation, sensing that something fundamental was shifting in the power structure of their school. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Who are you? Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I'm the person you should have left alone. The next morning brought chaos to Riverside High School. Sarah arrived to find news vans parked outside the main entrance, reporters interviewing students, and Principal Martinez standing on the school steps, trying to manage what had become a full-blown media circus. The story about systematic bullying at the school had exploded overnight, picking up traction on social media and drawing attention from education advocates, parent groups, and civil rights organizations. As Sarah walked through the crowd of reporters, several tried to approach her, but she politely declined to comment and made her way inside the building. The hallways were buzzing with excitement and nervous energy. Students clustered around phones, reading articles, and watching news coverage of their own school. Jessica was nowhere to be seen. Sarah, Marcus called out, jogging to catch up with her. Did you see the morning news? They're calling it bullying and cover-ups, the dark side of elite education. I saw it, Sarah replied calmly, opening her locker. Jessica's not here today, Emma added, appearing beside them. Neither are most of her inner circle. Word is their parents pulled them out until this blows over. It's not going to blow over, said David, joining their group. My dad worked for the district attorney's office. He says they're opening a formal investigation into the harassment complaints. Sarah nodded, filing away that piece of information. The legal pressure was exactly what she had hoped for when she decided to escalate the conflict beyond the school's ability to contain it. "Miss Martinez?" came a voice behind them. Sarah turned to see a woman in a professional suit approaching. "I'm Detective Lisa Rodriguez with the county sheriff's office. Could I speak with you privately?" Sarah's friends exchanged worried glances, but Sarah remained calm. Of course. They found an empty classroom where Detective Rodriguez closed the door and pulled out a notebook. "I'm investigating several complaints related to harassment, vandalism, and assault that have occurred at this school," the detective began. "Your name has come up as both a victim and a witness to these incidents." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I've reviewed the security footage from the parking lot incident, and I have to say, your response was remarkably professional. Where did you learn those techniques?" Sarah had been expecting this question ever since the parking lot incident. "My father is military. He insisted I learn self-defense." Detective Rodriguez studied her carefully. "That level of skill suggests more than basic self-defense training. Have you had any formal martial arts instruction? Military training, perhaps?" Sarah met the detective's gaze steadily. "I've had extensive training in personal protection." "I see." Detective Rodriguez made a note. "Can you walk me through your experiences here at Riverside High? Start from your first day." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah provided a detailed account of everything that had happened since her arrival. She stuck to the facts, provided specific dates and times, and offered to provide any documentation or evidence the detective might need. "This is very helpful," Detective Rodriguez said when Sarah finished. "One more question. Do you have any concerns about retaliation? Given the media attention this case is receiving, some of the individuals involved might feel pressure to respond." "I can take care of myself," Sarah replied. "I'm sure you can. But if you feel threatened or unsafe in any way, please contact me immediately." The detective handed Sarah a business card. "And Miss Martinez, whatever your background is, your decision to come forward about this harassment has probably helped a lot of other students who were too afraid to speak up." After the detective left, Sarah returned to her regular classes. But it was clear that everything had changed. Teachers spoke to her with newfound respect, students nodded approvingly as she passed, and even the administration seemed to view her differently. During lunch, Principal Martinez approached her table personally. "Miss Martinez," he said, "I wanted to thank you for handling this situation with such maturity. Your willingness to follow proper channels and provide evidence has been instrumental in addressing some serious problems at this school." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. "I also wanted you to know that we've implemented some immediate policy changes based on recent events. We're establishing an anonymous reporting system for harassment, requiring mandatory training for all staff on recognizing bullying behaviors, and creating a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation against students who report misconduct." After Principal Martinez left, Emma looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. "In 1 week, you've completely changed this school." "I just stood up for myself," Sarah replied. "No, you did more than that," Marcus said. "You stood up for everyone who's ever been bullied here. Jessica's reign of terror is over." As if to prove his point, they watched as former victims of Jessica's harassment began sitting together for the first time, no longer afraid of being seen as losers or outcasts. The social hierarchy that had seemed so permanent just a week ago was crumbling. That afternoon, as Sarah was packing up after her last class, she found a note in her locker. It was written on expensive stationery with elegant handwriting. "Meet me in the parking lot after school. We need to talk. Jay." Sarah considered the note for a moment. Meeting Jessica alone could be seen as accepting a challenge, but it could also be an opportunity to end the conflict definitively. She decided to take the risk. The parking lot was nearly empty when Sarah arrived at her car. Jessica was waiting by a luxury sedan, no longer flanked by her usual entourage. She looked smaller somehow, less intimidating without her army of followers. "You came," Jessica said as Sarah approached. "You asked me to." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face. "I need to know who you really are." "I told you. I am Sarah Martinez." "No," Jessica said firmly. "Sarah Martinez is a 17-year-old transfer student. But you're not just any 17-year-old. The way you fight, the way you talk to adults, the way you dismantled my entire social network in a week, that's not normal teenage behavior." Sarah considered her options. Her cover was already strained, and Detective Rodriguez's questions suggested that other people were starting to notice inconsistencies as well. Maybe it was time for a different approach. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. I'm not just any 17-year-old. So who are you? Sarah looked around the parking lot, making sure they were truly alone. Then, she made a decision that would have horrified her commanding officers. My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm 17 years old, and I'm currently the youngest cadet admiral in U.S. military history. Jessica stared at her in shock. That's impossible. I've spent the last 3 years at the Preston Military Academy, where I've trained in advanced combat techniques, military strategy, psychological warfare, and leadership under extreme conditions. I've commanded units of soldiers twice my age, planned operations that have saved lives, and earned decorations for valor that most career officers never receive. But why are you here? Why are you pretending to be a normal student? Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering her father's words about needing to understand what she was protecting. Because my commanding officers believed I needed to experience normal teenage life before committing to a full military career. They wanted me to understand what civilian life was like, what it meant to be a regular person instead of soldier. And instead you found me, Jessica said bitterly. Instead, I found someone who was using tactics I recognized from military interrogation and psychological warfare manuals to terrorize fellow students, Sarah corrected. Someone who would build a kingdom based on fear and intimidation. Jessica looked away, her face flushed with shame. I never thought of it like that. I know. That's what made it so effective. You weren't trying to be evil. You were just doing what came naturally. But the result was the same. They stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of everything that had happened settling between them. Finally, Jessica spoke again. What happens now? That depends, Sarah replied. The investigation is going to continue. The media attention is going to continue. Your mother's attempts to use influence and connections to make this go away are going to fail because this has moved beyond local politics. Am I going to be arrested? That's not up to me. But if you're asking for advice, I'd suggest getting ahead of this. Cooperate with investigators, accept responsibility for your actions, and work to make amends to the people you've hurt. Jessica laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. You're some kind of military superhero. I'm just a spoiled rich girl who's about to lose everything. You're not losing everything, Sarah said firmly. You're losing the ability to hurt people without consequences. There's a difference. My parents will never forgive me for this embarrassment. Then maybe it's time you stopped living for your parents' approval and started figuring out who you want to be. Jessica looked at her with surprise. Why are you being nice to me? After everything I did to you, Sarah considered the question. Because holding grudges is a luxury soldiers can't afford. Because you're not evil, just misguided. And because everyone deserves a chance to choose who they want to become. As they talked, other students began trickling out of the school building. Several stopped to stare at the unlikely sight of Jessica Chun and Sarah Martinez having what appeared to be a civil conversation. They're all watching, Jessica observed. Let them watch. Maybe they'll see that conflicts can end in something other than total destruction. Over the following days, the story continued to evolve. Jessica, following Sarah's advice, voluntarily met with investigators and provided detailed information about the harassment campaign. She also published a public apology on social media, acknowledging her behavior and committing to making amends. Her parents initially tried to fight the investigation, but the evidence was overwhelming and the media attention was too intense. Eventually, they accepted a settlement that included mandatory counseling for Jessica, a substantial donation to anti-bullying organizations, and a formal commitment to policy changes at the school. The 3 boys who had attacked Sarah in the parking lot were charged with assault and received community service sentences. Their scholarships to various colleges were revoked, a consequence that sent a clear message about the real-world implications of their choices. Most importantly, the culture at Riverside High began to change. The anonymous reporting system uncovered numerous other incidents of harassment and abuse that had been hidden for years. Teachers received training on recognizing and addressing bullying behavior. Students who had been silent for years began speaking up about their experiences. A month after the incident began, Sarah was called to Principal Martinez's office once again. This time, she found Detective Rodriguez waiting with him, along with 2 men in military uniforms she didn't recognize. Miss Martinez, Principal Martinez, said, "These gentlemen are from the Preston Military Academy. They'd like to speak with you." The older of the 2 officers, a colonel with silver hair and intense blue eyes, stepped forward. "Cadet Admiral Martinez," he said formally. "I'm Colonel Harrison, your new commanding officer." We need to discuss your recent unauthorized disclosure of classified information.